Hello, my name is Ottaviano Canuto, and I'm a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. The global footprint of COVID-19, the new coronavirus, is now clear beyond any doubt. In a short time since the beginning of the year, country after country have suffered outbreaks of the new coronavirus contamination dynamics, from China and other Asian countries to Italy and the rest of Europe, Iran, USA, Brazil, Morocco, Sub-Saharan Africa, India. Nobody seems to be ring-fenced against the new coronavirus. We are starting today a series of conversations about what the invasion by the new coronavirus means to our societies and economies. It is big. What's happening has implications for our lives ahead, for our societies, for our economies, and we all need more than ever good public policy response to it. Let's start today by discussing why every country in the world is facing a challenge of flattening coronavirus curves. The new coronavirus curves are not pretty, and we need to bend them. We need to make them the least pronounced possible. The new coronavirus invasion may happen for a relatively short time span, but it can be extremely disruptive and painful while it lasts. The first point that I would like to make is flattening pandemic curves saves lives. Everywhere the new coronavirus has landed, it has displayed a very strong pace of contamination. As a result, the number of people in need of clinical care tends to rise dramatically. A major problem comes from the fact that even in countries where there exists a strong capacity in local healthcare systems, this capacity tends to be swamped by the new coronavirus patients in need of critical healthcare, such as mechanical ventilators and so on. The infection curve on the left side of the chart, hitting against healthcare capacity, something that is hard to change in a short time span, tends to lead to high tolls in terms of death of infected people. Therefore, policies to flatten the pandemic curve and gain time become of essence, regardless of whether they reduce or not the absolute number of infected cases. The flattened curve to the right illustrates the point. Even if at the end of the day, the overall number of infections is the same with or without public health containment policies, lives are saved if the curve is flattened. Now, there are basically two types of policies to flatten pandemic curves. One is to identify and quarantine infected people from the population. This has been an approach successfully followed in Singapore, Taiwan, China, and South Korea, and in China on the second stage. There are, however, two major requisites for such an approach to be successfully implemented. First, there must be social capillarity on the use of technology and information, as well as government capability to use those information to track and monitor individuals. It's also necessary, there's a second requisite, an ability to apply widespread coronavirus tests to the population. Unfortunately, that's not the case of most countries. The other type of containment policy is to adopt social distancing with various degrees of width and government enforcement. By social distancing, we mean minimizing person-to-person contact. And this is done by banning travels, closing temporarily workshops and schools, as well as official recommendations or orders to stay at home. Such horizontal approach includes, of course, some demarcation of essential activities to be spared from those physical mobility restrictions. It can be used in combination with the selective focus, whenever there is capacity to do the selective approach. Fact of the matter is that lives tend to be saved. Now, this chart shows how two cities using different approaches. In the case of Bergamo, it was a do-nothing approach for some time, whereas Lodi decided to implement social distancing policies in a short time span. And the difference in the outcomes you can see there. This is, let's say, we couldn't find a better example, a better illustration of the disaster of a doing nothing approach. Now, a second point that I want to make is the one that the pandemic curve generates a recession curve that also needs to be contained. The coronavirus epidemics leads to both negative demand and negative supply shocks on the economy. And while demand and supply would yet be negatively impacted in a do-nothing scenario, such as the one in Bergamo, they tend to be exacerbated by social distancing policies. And notwithstanding the coronavirus short duration, its disruptive nature may leave scars, impeding a return to where the economy was prior to the shock. Firms that are solvent become suddenly illiquid and may bankrupt. Unemployment rises at a fast pace. Small businesses see their demand and revenues vanish suddenly. And that's where an extraordinary role of the state as a catastrophe insurer comes to the fore. The public sector needs to provide fiscal support, that is to say, additional resource to healthcare systems, income transfers to crisis-affected people, tax relief, and other measures to minimize the damage on the population. But also, it's important that the public sector provides credit available in favorable conditions to vulnerable firms. These emergency and temporary measures, ultimately beholden by the public sector, are geared at minimizing the disruptive consequences of the temporary but impactful sudden stop of the economy. The chart that you are seeing illustrates such a flattening of the recession curve to happen in tandem with flattening the pandemic curve. Not by chance, governments have announced dramatic policies of income transfers to workers, special lines of credit to segments of enterprises, tax relief measures, and so on. We will approach them in future conversations. Now, a question often appearing in the discussions about those answers is whether is there a trade-off, a dilemma between saving lives by containment policies and the output losses that come as a consequence of such policies. Could we adopt a do-nothing policy to minimize disruptions on the workings of the economic system? This is a false dilemma. This is a false trade-off, as illustrated in this chart. Let me refer to the historical experience with the 1918 influenza pandemic, which is an event in history comparable to what we are going through now. A study done by 3 economists of the Federal Reserve Bank, the US Central Bank, found that cities where policies like social distancing took place earlier and more aggressively in the US at the time did not perform economically worse than the others. If anything, those cities even grew faster after the pandemic was over. So their findings suggest that policies like those social distancing, and so on, not only lowered mortality, but also mitigated the adverse economic consequences of a pandemic. The havoc wreaked by the pandemic dynamics in a do-nothing scenario cannot be assumed as economically stronger than the one with containment policies. So policies such as stay at home may be uncomfortable, but the alternative would not be better. We must do whatever it takes to flatten the coronavirus infection and recession curves. Keep safe and stay tuned.